Chapter 4 Private Life, Russians as People. Comrades, we are building not a land of idlers where rivers flow with milk and honey, but the most organized and most industrious society in human history, and the people living in that society will be the most industrious, conscientious, organized, and politically conscious in history. Leonid Brezhnev. When the door opened, I thought for a moment that Boris Pasternak had come back to life. Those same craggy features were before me. Sensitive, soft, thoughtful eyes looked out over prominent cheekbones. The gray hair looked wind-blown. The forehead was a bit higher, the chin a bit longer, but it was the same strong, lean head and slender, vulnerable neck. The man at the door was not quite as tall as I had imagined Boris Pasternak from photographs, but the resemblance was so striking that I stood motionless for an instant before introducing myself and my wife to the poet's elder son, Zhenya, who welcomed us with gentle warmth. Over the months and years we came to know Zhenya and his wife, Alyona, their boys Boris and Petya, and their little daughter Lisa as well. On Pasternak's advice, Zhenya always referred to his father as Pasternak. Zhenya had forsaken the arts of politically too precarious. An engineer by training, he had become a specialist in automated control systems, but his real vocation and passion, in the face of the regime's ambivalence toward Pasternak, was laboring to preserve Pasternak's prestige and to keep the memory of him fresh by finding letters and other unpublished writings to put into print. Together, Zhenya and Alyona appealed for a museum to Pasternak to be opened at the rambling country dacha in Peredalkino, where Pasternak had lived, but the appeals went unheeded, and the dacha reverted to the Writers' Union, though the family retained a small cabin on the grounds. Not only was Dr. Zhivago still banned 15 years after the furor over Pasternak's winning the Nobel Prize, but the family had never seen the Western film version. Through an embassy friend, we arranged to have it shown one evening to the Pasternak family in the creaky, high-ceilinged living room of their Moscow apartment. Paintings done by Pasternak's father and others came down from the wall to accommodate a makeshift screen. The movie disappointed some family friends who thought the characterizations shallow and were offended by what seemed a propagandist ending in which a young couple strolled off beside a huge dam, so like an official Soviet film and so unlike Pasternak. But Zhenya, more tolerant, thought the film had captured Zhivago's free romantic spirit and had been true to Pasternak in the essentials. What stuck in my mind was the moment when everyone, foreigners and Russians alike, broke out laughing at the movie's portrayal of the meek Milquetoast welcome given by young Zhivago and his step-parents to his stepsister returning to Moscow by train from Paris. It was abrupt and cool, a quick, flat, unemotional Western peck on the cheek and a handshake, obviously directed and acted by people unaware of the effusive, emotional outpouring that occurs when Russians greet or part at a railroad station. They immerse each other into endless hugs, embraces, warm kisses on both cheeks, 3 times, not just kissing in the air for show, but strong, firm kisses, often on the lips, and not only between men and women, or between women, but man to man as well. Westerners used to discount this as an idiosyncrasy of Nikita Khrushchev, with his famous bear hugs of Fidel Castro in fatigues and beard, but it is the Russian way. Russians relish the joy of reunion with gusto, and they linger over the anguish of parting as if there were no onlookers, and it were a private occasion. So tame and out of character was the movie version that night that the Russians were still chortling about it after the movie ended. Indeed, all through the movie, except for Zhivago and Lara, the characters did not sugar their conversation with those affectionate little mutterings and diminutives which families, friends, or even close neighbors lavish upon each other unthinkingly. These petty verbal intimacies are one of the pleasant features of close relationships among Russians that foreigners often fail to perceive amidst the general gruffness. More typical of Russians in public is the totally impassive reaction that I noticed one day at a jazz lecture. The speaker, Leonid Perevzev, was a real authority of American jazz. He put life and enthusiasm into his talk and used excellent jazz recordings to illustrate it, a rare treat for a Soviet audience which has little chance to hear such classics, and yet not once did a single head bob in rhythm. Not one pair of fingers was snapping or clicking to the music. No feet were tapping. No spontaneous applause broke out. People were studious, immobile, unexpressive. It was an audience of 1,000 young people for whom tickets had been very hard to get. They listened intently to both music and commentary, yet they betrayed no emotion or rhythm indicating that the music had touched them in any way. Their universal coolness so baffled me that I later asked a young teacher what was wrong. Why had the audience not reacted to the music? Did they dislike it? "Oh no," she said, "we feel it inside, but it is just not accepted here to show emotion in public. At a lecture or concert like that, we check ourselves." This perplexing dichotomy between the warm outpouring at the railroad stations and the self-restraint at the jazz lecture is one of the most puzzling phenomena of Russian life. As a people, the Russians have won a wide reputation for their virtues of endurance, resilience, hardiness, patience, and stoicism that enabled them to persevere and eventually to wear down the armies of Napoleon and Hitler in bitter Russian winters. Often this external toughness comes across in public as coarse indifference, passive fatalism, and pushy discourtesy. Western visitors have commented on the glum, shuttered faces of Russian street crowds and the brusque, negative surliness of service people. In our early months, I remember nodding at Russians or saying hello if their eyes met mine at close range in public, but all I ever got in return was an impassive stare. A Russian told me that Soviet agencies like Tourist, whose employees work with foreigners, get special instructions to smile more than usual because Westerners expect it. It is true that Russians, especially Muscovites, often come across as gruff, cold, mullish, and impersonal in public, but in private, within a trusted circle, usually the family and close friends, but often embracing new acquaintances very quickly if some personal chord of empathy is touched, they are among the warmest, most cheerful, generous, emotional, and overwhelmingly hospitable people on earth. I am not talking about the false bonhomie that Soviet officialdom manufactures at the drop of a visiting delegation, usually by forcing more vodka on visitors than they want to drink, but genuine, selfless, heartwarming friendship. Russians, Joseph Brodsky, a freckled, Irish-looking poet, told me as we strolled one cold afternoon in Moscow, are like the Irish in their poverty, their spiritual intensity, their strong personal relationships, their sentimentality. This dichotomy of coldness and warmth springs in part from some deep duality of the Russian soul, and temperament forged by climate and history. It makes the Russians as a people both stoics and romantics, both long-suffering martyrs and self-indulgent hedonists, both obedient and unruly, both stuffy and unassuming, publicly pompous and privately unpretentious, both uncaring and kind, cruel and compassionate. It was Dostoevsky who had written that Russians were half saint, half savage. An Egyptian journalist reminded me, Russians can be very sentimental, but also cold and cruel. His plump Russian wife added, a Russian can weep at a piece of poetry at 1 minute and kill an enemy on that same spot a few minutes later. Wright Miller, an English writer with great insight into Russian character, recalled in 1973 in his book Who Are the Russians that Ivan the Terrible murdered his own son in a rage and then knelt in paroxysms of remorse, or plundered monasteries and then gave them funds. I've experienced this quicksilver change in mood and morality on a much more mundane scale at the Moscow Art Theater one evening. It surprised me to see a Russian audience moved to tears by a shallow maudlin drama that ended on a predictable note of human kindness. The women around me were wiping their eyes, unable to join the applause, and yet in a minute or two these same women were pushing and knocking each other about during the furious scramble in the cloakroom, as if the play's message had left no imprint whatsoever. Both the crying and the shoving are gut feelings. They come from the stomach, not the mind, Andrei Voznesenskiy remarked to me later, and this is very typical of Russians. There is, however, another root for the dichotomy in Russian behavior. In their authoritarian environment, from childhood onward, Russians acquire an acute sense of place and propriety, of what is accepted and what is not, of what they can get away with and what they had better not attempt, and they conform to their surroundings, playing the roles that are expected of them, with a kind of deliberate schizophrenia. They divide their existence into their public lives and their private lives, and distinguish between official relationships and personal relationships. This has anywhere to some degree, of course, but Russians make this division more sharply than others because of political pressures for conformity, so they adopt two very different codes of behavior for their two lives. In one they are taciturn, hypocritical, careful, cagey, passive. In the other they are voluble, honest, direct, open, passionate. In one, thoughts and feelings are held in check. Our public life is a living lie, caustically commented an experimental physicist. In the other, emotions flow warmly, without moderation. Even the scale on which public and private lives are acted out is vastly different. The exterior landscape of Moscow, for example, is one of grandiose facades. Stalin planted 7 mock Gothic skyscrapers that tower over the city like ungainly drip castles of sandstone, their spires crowned with red stars. The newer subdivisions are a forest of massive prefab apartment blocks, numbing in their monotony and duplicated in cities all across the country, pockmarked and graying with the instant aging that afflicts all Soviet architecture. They are left naked without grass or shrubbery, or shutters or flower boxes, like fleets of dowdy ocean liners gone aground on some barren shore and dwarfing their passengers with their inhuman scale. One of the favorite landmarks of the city fathers is the Hotel Racia, a monument to their infatuation with gigantic structures. It is supposedly the largest hotel in Europe, with 3,076 rooms, 5,738 beds, 9 restaurants, 20 cafeterias, 6 banquet halls, 10 miles of corridors, and no air conditioning. The dimensions of streets, too, are Olympian. The main boulevards that cut through the city are 10, 12, 14 lanes wide, so immense that New York's Fifth Avenue, by comparison, seems like a neighborhood side street. Another grandiose fixture of public life is the heroic Statuary. In Moscow, the central shrine is Lenin's tomb. In other cities, the central square is presided over by a powerful statue of Lenin, usually in a wind-furled overcoat, confidently striding toward a brighter future, or hand raised and eyes agleam, exhorting the proletariat to unite. The energetic civic consciousness of this genre is strikingly conveyed in the towering World War II monument in Volgograd, a 160-foot tall Mother Russia on a hill crest, sword raised against the foe, her dead prayerfully buried around her feet. The ultimate in statue cliches of socialist realism are the huge stylized stainless steel figures of communist construction in Moscow. The muscular young worker, one fist clenched around a hammer and the other brawny arm locked in grip, with a stalwart farm maid holding aloft her sickle. Nearby, on the other side of the exhibition of the achievements of the people's economy, a dramatic upswept rocket riding a tail of exhaust that must be 15 stories high shoots skyward in monumental commemoration of Soviet space exploits. The scale of these monuments is an important clue to their public appeal and an insight into the Soviet spirit. Russians like awesome structures, impressively broad avenues, sweeping vistas, and images of titanic exploits that convey power. They have a Texan's love for exaggerated bigness that outdoes the American love of bigness, much as the Soviet national economic growth ethic has surpassed the now shaken American faith in the automatic blessings of economic growth. With the spirit of Paul Bunyan, Russians take pride in the sheer magnitude of the hydroelectric dams they have thrown across the broad rivers. Of Siberia, they revel in the size of their heavy trucks, their steel plants, and their huge intercontinental rockets. Size is power, yet in their private lives they seek escape from the Titanic. They reduce things to a human scale. The interior landscape of Moscow or any other city is vastly different from the grandiose exteriors, passing through the quiet, foot-worn, unkempt courtyards into the darkened entryways and up the creaky wooden, old-fashioned, double-doored elevators. I found myself adjusting to a lifestyle that is less affected, less belittling, more human. The better connected and more affluent families have their sets of lacquered furniture, but many more of the dozens of apartments we visited were furnished by a motley assortment of tables and chairs that looked as if taken from different attics. The rooms lacked brightness or color, but that mattered little to the Russians. They took it for granted that beds would serve as couches in daytime. Sometimes a curtain in a large room separated the sleeping quarters of a child from that of the parents, especially in a communal apartment where there were 5 doorbells on the one outer door, and each large room housed an entire family. Rugs were a sometimes thing. Dining rooms did not exist. but a writing table in the largest bedroom would double for meals. Many apartments seemed to be in a state of permanent but comfortable disorder, nor were they likely to be hastily and specially neatened up for visitors any more than their occupants were likely to change out for old clothes for new arrivals. That happens on holidays or when Russians are officially prepared to be ready for foreigners. The lifestyle of Russian homes is natural and unvarnished. I found this one of the most attractive qualities of Russian life, and it is a piece with the general unpretentiousness of their private lives. Russians are troubled much less than Americans, for example, by compulsive worrying about appearances, keeping up with the Joneses, being brightly scrubbed, having a well deodorized body, perfumed breath, and a constant fresh look. In Russia, a person can be acneed, homely, sweaty, and seedy looking and still be accepted. We found, too, that visitors who are truly welcome in Russian homes are usually ushered immediately to that most humble and yet most homely of places, the kitchen table. If the kitchen is large enough to accommodate more than a couple of people, the table, whether in kitchen or sitting room, has a central place in the Russian home, a tradition carried on from country life. Unlike Westerners, with their cocktail hours and their drawing rooms, Russians go right to the table when friends call. It is usually a small table, overcrowded, but in that way more intimate, since Russians live close to one another all the time, like the physical proximity. One Sunday lunch at the Pasternak's, we were 10 around a table, no larger than one in an American breakfast nook, children mixed in, with adults, and the grandfather in no particular order, knees bumped self-consciously all during the meal, as Russians bump each other while shopping or standing pressed together in church. Had we been special guests, a special table might have been laid, but we were in famille, and the table was set accordingly. Dishes of different sizes and from different sets, ordinary restaurant kitchen knives, forks, and spoons. The meal was wholesome but simple, the portions adequate but modest. Sour cabbage in vinegar and oil, brown bread, a watery broth over vegetables, veal patties, potatoes, and peas, and for dessert, a Swedish lemon Kool-Aid over cut apples. It was, after all, the midday Sunday meal. Ordinary meals can be very meager: buckwheat porridge, some cheese, and a bit of salted or smoked fish, heaps of brown bread, perhaps some sausage and tea. The table, however, functions as much more than a place where Russians take their meals. The table is a meeting ground. For hours Anne and I have sat with Russians around a table drinking strong tea, always a deep, rich mahogany color, for Russians love their tea piping hot, well sugared and very strong, sometimes even black, or else guzzling something stronger yet, nibbling on hard toast or cheese, or other simple fare, and talking all afternoon, evening, and into the night about practically anything. In the Russian home, the table takes the place of the American den, family room, and fireplace. It is the center of social life, a bridge between humans, a place for communion. It is here in their homes that Russians find refuge from the sterility and hypocrisy of public life, and the aggravating hassle of the marketplace. Among family and friends, they become the wonderful, flowing, emotional people of Tolstoy's novels, sharing humor and sorrows and confidences, entering into a simple but profound intimacy that seems less self-centered and less self-conscious than what one generally finds in the West. Precisely because their public lives are so supervised, and because they cannot afford to be open and candid with most people, Russians invest their friendships with enormous importance. Many of them, in cities at least, are only children whose closest friends come to take the place of missing brothers and sisters. They will visit with each other almost daily, like members of the family. Their social circles are usually narrower than those of Westerners, especially Americans who put such great stock in popularity. But relations between Russians are usually more intense, more demanding, more enduring, and often more rewarding. I knew of a couple sent off to Cuba for a 2-year assignment, and another family put up their teenage son in an already crowded 2-room apartment. When Bella Akhmadulina, the poet, married for the 3rd time, she and her husband were broke, and their friends bought them an entire apartment full of furniture. Let a dissident intellectual get in trouble, and real friends will loyally take the terrible political risk of going to his rescue. Anne and I, too, have felt the warmth and impulsive generosity of Russians. A leading ballerina in Leningrad, hearing of our difficulties in finding ballet shoes for one of our daughters, asked her foot size and instantly got up from the table to fetch one of her own pair, especially made for one of her roles. A couple in Tashkent, with whom we established a quick and open friendship on first meeting, were so moved they gave us as a memento a rare book of photographs of archaeological finds in Uzbekistan, out of print and personally inscribed to them by the author. In another home, my wife admired a rather expensive set of large teacups which the hostess had just bought, and she immediately made them as a present to us. In the Caucasus, a dark-haired Alpine guide learned that my mother was ill with cancer, and very movingly offered me his entire, pitifully small but precious supply of mummy, a medicinal paste made from herb grasses that grow high in the mountains and are gathered with difficulty by climbers. When friends fall sick, Russians will go to enormous trouble to help, regardless of inconvenience. Friendships are not only compensation for the cold impersonality of public life, but a vital source of personal identity. Friends are the one thing we have which are all our own, a mathematician confided. They are the one part of our lives where we can make our own choice completely for ourselves. We cannot do that in politics, religion, literature, work. Always someone above influences our choice, but not with friends. We make that choice for ourselves. The choice among intellectuals, at least, is made with special care, for one essential ingredient of Russian friendships is the political test of trust. This gives them special depth and commitment. Americans, spared the violence of Soviet political purges, repression, and constant pressures for ideological conformity, do not have to make the vital, acute judgment of sorting out true friend from devious informer. Soviets must make that judgment often and always unerringly. Human relations are a deadly serious business here, a scientist remarked to me. We resent it if a foreigner comes to a party and brings along Russian friends. It ruins the evening for us because it takes us a long time to know someone and come to trust them. Although the situation has improved since the Stalin era, when members of families were turned against each other, this self-protective mistrust of all but a handful of people is one of the most depressing and corrosive effects of political controls which divide people against each other involuntarily. You can't trust anyone but your pillow. One young man cursed bitterly to me after learning that one of his longtime friends had informed on him to the KGB. Among the underground artists, who frequently mingled with Western diplomats, more than one quietly confessed concern about which of their group were the Stakachi, informers, or Sakasati, KGB secret collaborators, keeping tabs on the rest. It was taken for granted that several people among the artists were informers. Most people develop an animal sense about each other. You never tell the real truth to anyone who is not a real friend, an auburn-haired editor of children's books explained. You know, we have lived next door to another couple all our lives practically. I have known the wife since childhood, and yet I have never told her the honest truth. We have always been friendly. We have known them well. They have come to our apartment, and we have been to theirs, but they are different people from us. We could sense it. How? I asked. The husband is a nice guy, a scientist, interjected her stout, curly-haired husband, a science writer. You can drink with him, talk with him about pretty girls, and that sort of thing, but nothing serious, you know. When you meet with people, you sense whether there is that critical faculty or not. It doesn't matter whether they are peasants, workers, or intellectuals. You sense whether they think for themselves. If not, you don't say anything important. For safety's sake, Russians hold each other at bay. We don't want personal relations with that many other people, one man said bluntly. They commit themselves to only a few, but cherish those. Within the trusted circle, there is an intensity in Russian relationships that Westerners find both exhilarating and exhausting. When they finally open up, Russians are looking for a soul brother, not a mere conversational partner. They want someone to whom they can pour out their hearts, share their miseries, tell about family problems or difficulties with a lover or mistress, to ease the pain of life, or to indulge in endless philosophical windmill tilting. As a journalist, I sometimes found it ticklish because Russians want a total commitment from a friend. They do not understand a journalist who regards it his job to maintain open contact with all and professes ideals of independence and non-partisanship. Russians are not after decency or fair play. They want allies, partisans. This goes for officials, dissidents, and people in between. Their friendship is tribal, inclusive, and excluding, and they gauge each other by friends, cliques, groups, reckoning these ties in high politics as well as in personal relations are far more meaningful than some abstract loyalty to the system or the party. They seek and offer a personal commitment from friends and cohorts that Westerners rarely accord more than a very few people in their lives. Normally, Russians keep their emotions under lock and key and take them out to be shown only to relatives and close friends, or on special occasions. But I found that some little twist of fate, a genuine calamity, a joke, a gesture, the presence of a child, a personal liking, can open Russians up, and then that sense of intimacy and involvement can envelop one even on first meeting if the Russian feels he has found a soul brother, and especially if there has been some vodka to tide the flow of friendship. It is this directness in the Russian character, this tendency to startling openness, that makes Americans feel Russians are like them in temperament, more so than the complicated French or the restrained British and Germans. Russians call this openness their broad spirit, shirokaya dusha, and they pride themselves on talking openly, dusha dush, heart to heart, or literally soul to soul. There is a public side to this trait, the maudlin sentimentality of Russians, for the great suffering which they have endured not only toughened them into a nation of stoics, but also softened them into a nation of incurable romantics. The outside world knows the stoicism, the phlegmatic fatalism of the common man so aptly captured in the national catchword Nichivo, which literally means nothing, but comes across as never mind, don't let it bother you, there's nothing you can do about it, so don't bother me. It conveys uncomplaining endurance, indifference, futility, refusal to accept responsibility. To someone on the wrong side of Nichivo, it is crippling, and rarely is it accompanied by an apology. One American newspaper editor flying from Moscow to London rose at 5 a.m. and took the long ride to the airport to his flight, only to discover that it did not leave on the date written on his ticket, but the next day. No flight was even scheduled on his day. His ticket had been written incorrectly. No other space was available for 24 hours, so that he had to miss some London appointments. Nichivo, they said. But the opposite face of Russian character is that a genuine calamity will sometimes ease or suspend the rules because it arouses compassion. We learned that in dire and urgent family need, the Foreign Ministry and Visa Office would issue exit visas in 2 days instead of the usual 4 or 5. Such compassion is something ordinary Russians approve of wholeheartedly, for in spite of all the official rhetoric about work, discipline, and devotion to the economic plan, they are moved more by someone's personal warmth than his work performance. A man can be a good worker, but work is just a thing. A balding government economist explained to me, what really matters is his spirit, his relationship to others. If he is too scrupulous, too cold, people will dislike him. We have a word, sakavati, dryish. His nose wrinkled in disapproval, but sukhoi, dry, is worse, and finally sakar, which means dry like a bread crust, no human touch at all, is the worst. In its public face, this sentimentalism shows itself in the Russian love of the lush melancholy of Tchaikovsky. In the fairy tale world, of romantic ballets like Swan Lake and Sleeping Beauty, what the ornate productions of the Bolshoi do for the Russian soul is to blend grandeur with make-believe and provide escapism on an exalted scale. Nothing appeals more to the Victorian 19th century taste of Russians than the organdie frill of ballerinas, skirts whirling in endless pirouettes. The modern intellectual compositions of a choreographer like Jerome Robbins leave most Russians unmoved. I saw one man stalk out of the New York City Ballet Company performance of some Robbins numbers one night in Moscow, perplexed by the lack of storyline and complaining this is not ballet. Strange as it may seem for a communist state, the greater the pageantry of royalty, the more schmaltzy the music, the more extravagant the sets, the fancier the masked balls, the more melodramatic the emotions, the larger the world of make-believe, the greater the pull at the heartstrings, the more the Russians enjoy it. They fell in love with Van Cliburn as the handsome young American who played their Tchaikovsky with heart. When La Scala Opera and coursed toward Moscow, the Russians were literally overcome by the power and emotion of their Verdi Requiem, and showered the chorus with applause, bravos, and flowers. For Russians, flowers are a special sign of admiration and affection. One of their nicest customs is to arrive at someone's apartment for dinner bearing flowers, even if only one wrapped in cellophane. At Novodevichy Cemetery, burial ground of the famous, they will buy flowers and stroll among the gravestones, laying a bloom here and there where they feel special respect. In theaters, the management carts out potted plants or bouquets for stars as a ritual, but you can tell when a Russian audience has been powerfully moved. Flowers rise up out of the audience. Their response to La Scala was no accident, for Russians are like Italians in their love of strong emotions and undiluted heroics. In spirit, they are the most northern of Latin peoples. We have always felt very close to Spain, a literary critic once mused, not just because of the Spanish Civil War, but we have felt a kinship for the Spanish. They are a noble people. Spain is a country of chivalry and romance. We like Don Quixote very much, and it is true Quixote could be a Russian hero. If sentimentality is the counterpoint to Russian stoicism, then the folksy, traditional peasant ways of Russians are the antithesis to the inflated rhetoric of Marxism-Leninism about the new Soviet man. Not only are Russians easygoing, indolent, and disorganized, rather than scientific, rational, and efficient, but they are as simple and homespun in their leisure as their friendship. Martyrs of self-denial they may be in time of crisis, but otherwise they are lusty hedonists, devoted to such sensual pleasures as feasting, drinking, and bathing, and in open contradiction to the strictures of scientific socialism, they are a mystical, religious, superstitious people at heart. My politically orthodox, middle-aged language teacher tried to persuade me that superstitions were passé, only for poor, uneducated people or those plagued by illness. People who are healthy and well off, she insisted, have no need for them. An elderly writer agreed, but added that it was the ailments and ordeals of Russian life which made Russians such great believers in omens, signs, and portents, such paganistic warriors about the evil eye, such apostles of old wives' tales and folk cures. I recall a poet seriously counseling me once never to go back to my apartment for something I had forgotten because it was bad luck to return and to have to leave a second time. A pretty teacher cautioned that if someone gave a girl an affectionate pat on the rump, he must immediately tug her skirt, or else no one would ever make love to her. A well-educated lady instructed our family on having all members of the household sit for a moment of silence before anyone departed on a journey, evidently a holdover from religious practice, for when she rose, she said, "Go with God." Others were careful not to mention the precise destination of trips so as not to attract the attention of the evil eye. Our Russian maid informed Anne that on New Year's Eve it is common practice to put 3 slips of paper under your pillow labeled Good Year, Bad Year, and Medium Year. In the morning you reach a hand under the pillow and pull out 1 slip to find out what kind of new year is in store. The maid said she did not dare try it because she couldn't bear the burden of knowing she was in for a bad year. We knew other Russians who, like Orientals, put their faith in the zodiac names of the years. Still others, including intellectuals, swore that leap year is unlucky and attributed the disastrous harvest of 72, among other calamities, to that cause. The coming of anything so precious as a child invokes all manner of precautions. It is bad luck to pick a name in advance, bad luck to buy a present ahead of time, even worse to discuss the likely date. Unwittingly, I once asked a prospective father when the child was due, and a family-friendly friend cut in to admonish me, "It's not good to ask." The father, a technical man, shyly replied, "I don't know," and the woman approvingly told him, "That's the best answer." Russians also regard it as a bad sign, perhaps more out of conformity than superstition, if a child is left-handed. The moment they catch it starting to eat or draw with the left hand, they correct it into right-handedness. So strong are the inhibitions against shaking hands across the threshold for fear that it foreshadows a quarrel, that I came home to America hesitating to reach my hand through an open door. Russians do not knock on wood so much as we, but they spit figuratively over their left shoulders for the same purpose. 13 persons is bad luck. At a table, though Russian engineers do dare to put 13th floors in their buildings, Friday is a melancholy day, perhaps going back to Good Friday, but what intrigued me was that Monday is so widely regarded as inauspicious for launching a new undertaking. Not until some friendly Soviet journalist put me wise that I understand why trips for foreign correspondence so often began late Sunday rather than Monday morning. Any cat, not just a black cat, is a bad omen crossing one's path, but when you get a new home, Russians said, a cat should be the first creature to enter. If a bird flies in a window, it is a very bad portent of impending tragedy, possibly death or jail. The roots of many of these superstitions seem to lie in the countryside, like the Russian fondness for proverbs or their belief in folk remedies. City people, as well as peasants, often prefer medicinal herbs and grasses or mustard plaster over modern drugs for simple ailments. An American friend was advised to apply a copper coin to reduce swelling. We saw Russians wearing garlic cloves around their necks to fight off a cold. Russians have a wholesome, old-fashioned simplicity to their pleasures too, a way of turning back to nature or improvising simple, inexpensive pursuits. Television, except for sports, is pretty dull, and the Soviet Union is a land of far less manufactured entertainment than the West. No drive-in movies, pinball machines, roller skating rinks, no stock car speedways, and practically no bowling alleys or amusement parks to match Coney Island. Ask Soviet officialdom about leisure activities, and they rattle off how many millions are involved, either actually or on paper, in organized sports or taking union-subsidized vacations at sanatoria. These cut-rate vacation passes, putyaki, which are sometimes very hard to get, are among the greatest boons the Soviet system provides the common man. For like the Germans, the Russians are strong on health cures, sulfur treatments, and mud baths. Several times on official tours, I saw workers at sanatoria with legs or arms immersed in tubs of warm mud, or women inhaling sulfur fumes and proclaiming that a 26-day, $200 visit to a sanatorium was an ideal vacation. But official facilities and official programs take care of only a small fraction of Soviet leisure. Most activities are much more informal and modest. The men, old and young, gather in huddles around park benches to play chess, I presumed, but more often it turned out to be dominoes, and usually with a good bit of betting. Russians love lotteries too. So much have pets come back into vogue as a hobby that on Sundays a massive business is done at Moscow's Bird Market, a sprawling, muddy, open-air flea market where people sell birds, guppies, tropical fish, rabbits, cats, dogs, guinea pigs, and other pets that they have raised, as well as the homemade paraphernalia to house and feed them. The rage among the young is collecting souvenir lapel pens, a practice that seems to have surpassed stamp and coin collecting as a fad and led to the minting of hundreds of millions of little emblems by every city, club, agency, enterprise, and organization in the country. Foreign tourists are often waylaid by small boys offering handfuls of badges known as snakchiki in exchange for chewing gum. I remember that Canadian hockey players and fans were absolutely besieged by snakchiki collectors hunting prized Canadian pens. So widespread and sophisticated has this hobby become that professional collectors meet, usually surreptitiously, in an underpass near Gorky Park to swap, compare, and sell unusual specimens, mounted on felt boards, carefully covered with transparent plastic, and carried in attaché cases. Considerable profiteering has developed. Pravda once wagged its disapproving finger, not only at adult collectors but at public enterprises for spending huge sums to design and put out snakchiki. What is more, Pravda took offense at the Chelyabinsk Dog Club for producing a pen that resembled a prestigious military decoration, and bridled at a plumbers group in the Azerbaijan Republic for putting out a miniature toilet seat pen with the inscription, "Best Plumber of the Azerbaijan Sanitary Technical Assembly Enterprise." When it comes to entertainment, Russians have lost none of their traditional enthusiasm for the classic one-ring circus, with dancing bears and unbelievable feats of gymnastic and acrobatics. Even when they go out on the town at a spot like the Sofia restaurant with its all-girl band, the frolicking of most people has a wholesome athletic exuberance. Some go just to get drunk. A few young couples are pretty up-to-date with Western dances, but most people do a bouncy jig that is more sport than dance. Left to their own devices, however, the majority of Russians turn back to nature for relaxation. They will take an electric commuter train out into the country and simply wander through the high grass in their floral print calico dresses, or lie by a riverbank guzzling beer. On Friday nights, the railroad stations are crowded with young people carrying crude backpacks and bedrolls, headed for the country to hike and sleep in the open air. In fields and forests, anywhere there is space, I have seen them playing volleyball, even in the snow, and sometimes just popping the ball around a human circle if they have no net. But the Russian outdoor hobby par excellence, one that always bemuses Westerners, is mushroom picking. In the fall, it approaches a national craze. Connoisseurs treat the location of their favorite hunting grounds for premier species as top secret. Less dedicated souls creep through any old forest or glen for hours on end, clutching pails, satchels or handkerchiefs, and caps converted into makeshift containers, and scanning the earth for hidden treasures, or pausing to gossip and picnic at peak season. Competition gets so keen that groups organize expeditions, rent buses through their factories on Friday, spend the night in the bus on a country road, catnapping or warming themselves with tea or vodka, so that at daybreak they can be the first to get a crack at tender new mushrooms. So numerous are the varieties that it takes a practiced eye to distinguish poisonous from non-poisonous. To aid rank amateurs, Soviet magazines blossom in the fall with charts that approximate racing forms, giving pointers on the seasons and surroundings in which various specimens perform best. But the charts are so complicated that when we tried it, we spent more time studying our chart than hunting mushrooms. This is a sport that has more significance than initially meets the eye. Connoisseurs insist that each species of mushroom has its own proper drink. The milk mushroom is best with refined browned vodka, known as Petrovka. One old hand told me. The little redheads demand clear vodka, crystal clear and very cold, so that the vodka does not numb your sense of taste. In fact, some people gather all kinds of mushrooms just to have another excuse for drinking vodka of any kind. But the real point of mushroom hunting for most people is to escape into the country, to stroll, to get away from it all. Russians have a passion for the countryside. City people, like American urbanites, revel in roughing it at some rented peasant cabin, cooking on a stove tucked out in a shed, using the outhouse in the garden, hooking pots and pans over the weather-beaten wooden fence, palings to dry, the sun playing through a stand of birches, or the coolness of the majestic pines casts a spell. But for a long time I found the open countryside a disappointment. Instead of offering dramatic scenery, Russia is a vast flat land, stretching beyond every horizon to fill a continent. Like the open, limitless prairie of Kansas, it lacks the breathtaking vistas of Switzerland, the picturesque hills of Bavaria, or the hedgerows and stone walls that give the English countryside its charm. Russia is plainer, more rambling, wilder, undisciplined. "I love the well-tended English garden," a Russian walking companion remarked to me as we passed into a private enclosure outside Moscow one day. But the Russian garden does something for my soul. This puzzled me. Here behind the green fence was a Russian garden, wild and uncombed. I would not have called it a garden at all. It was just a fenced-in chunk of woodland. Shrubs, trees, grasses grew freely, in no pattern, shaped by no hand, and then I realized that this was precisely its appeal to the Russian soul. In its rambling, wild, deliciously undisciplined disarray, it provided release from their over-tended, overcrowded, over-supervised lives. Russians need to break the bonds, burst the limits, spiritually take off their shoes, and run barefoot, and they do that in their countryside. On another occasion, Anne and I went to Dombai, a mountain ski center in the northern Caucasus, 800 miles south of Moscow. Two rickety chairlifts hiked us up only about 650 feet to an open meadow at the foot of the mountains. Even for the most modest run, we had to hike half a mile and then climb up a hill on our skis. There was no tow. Climbing uphill 400 yards or so for each little run became even more of a chore because the surface snow turned slushy before midday in the warm March sun. But the Russian vacationers did not mind in the least. The setting was truly beautiful, evoking the Alps. They had a chance to commune with nature, never mind the skiing, and with the sun blazing away, these pasty-faced northerners happily peeled off almost all their clothes, and sunbathed in swimsuits or underwear on every available outcropping of rock. Except for beaches, the only place where I saw more Russian flesh than on that slope was at the Banya, a venue that is as thoroughly Russian as the gathering around the kitchen table, and just as important, a meeting ground. The Russian banya, or bathhouse, is a cross between the Finnish sauna and the steamy Turkish bath. Its purpose, with a special twist of Russian masochism, is to make you sweat in order to flush out dirt through the pores. It can cure most diseases, one veteran told me, but like mushroom hunting, it is not merely the act of bathing that counts, but the entire process, the expedition to the baths, the careful ritual of weighing in, of soaping, steaming, rinsing, weighing, and beginning all over again, and the masculine conviviality. This small talk and joking en naturel that go with communal bathing. The regulars get to know each other. I could overhear them chatting. Haven't seen you in a long time. Yes, been away on assignment. How's the steam today? Fine. For the banya is a complete form of recreation in itself, the closest thing that Russian males have to a men's club. Women are segregated, but priced within everyone's reach, which is one reason why, like mushroom gathering, it is so popular. For 60 kopecks, the customer pays the price of admission, gets a rough sheet which Russian bathers drape around themselves like a Roman toga, and rents a venik, a bundle of leafy birch twigs that Russians use to flail themselves in the steam room to help the steam do its cleansing, and at the same time leave the gentle fragrance of birch in their pores. Although Russian friends told me that the intelligentsia, blue-collar workers, and government officials tend to patronize their own favorite bathhouses, the banya as an institution struck me as one of the few real levelers of Soviet society. In the change room, where there are no lockers but only clothing hooks on the upright benches, and for a tip, the attendant watches your wallet. I have seen business suits and military officers' uniforms hanging beside rough work clothes or worn peasant jackets. Most of Moscow's bathhouses predate the revolution and were favorite haunts of rich merchants who used to feast in private rooms, take dips in marble pools, and generally enjoy a high life. Today, things are more proletarian. The gaudy, ornate Sandunovsky bath has faded to the point that its tile floors and statuary are chipped, and its chandeliers, as one Russian friend quipped, are so vulgar that they are almost attractive. The steam room resembles a boiler room with open piping, but Russians don't mind the seedy surroundings so long as they can savor the folksiness of their communal cleansing. The banya is supposed to produce a sense of well-being, but in my experience, Russians do not really enjoy that without a preliminary dash of masochism. Like the Finns, they like the steam room kept so hot that the air burns the nostrils when you breathe. They consider the choicest spot to be the hottest balcony, up 6 or 7 stone steps, where the moisture burns the eyes, and where the veterans endure their agony and lose their pound of flesh. 5 to 7 minutes is all you should take, one Russian advised, spotting me as a tenderfoot. Another insisted that if I wanted to stay longer, you'd better wear something on your head, an old felt hat or something. I sat among them, blinking away the sweat, trying to keep still, soothed by the swearing and contented grunts of other bathers, thrashing themselves or each other into the rosy pinkness with their birch twigs. Here, do my back, will you? Or more on the legs. Their low-keyed muttering was periodically punctuated by the inevitable bickering over whether to throw more water on the fire bricks in the oven. Some veteran, not sweating to his own satisfaction, and spotting a newcomer entering the steam room, would command more water, and the new man was duty-bound by custom to bring in 1 or 2 zinc tubfuls of water to dash on the fire bricks. Enough, came a chorus of gasps from those overcome by the hot, heavy air. Some bathers favored mugfuls of beer or tiny amounts of eucalyptus scent to perfume the steam, but the key was not aroma, but striking the delicate moisture balance. Too much water or beer made the heat unbearable, but too little robbed the aficionados of their necessary quotient of suffering. Like so much of Russian life, relief comes at the moment of escape from self-torture when bathers flee to the change room outside. There they lounge around naked or wrapped loosely in their sheets, telling jokes, arguing over last night's hockey game against the Canadians or a Spartak Dynamo soccer game. It is a pleasant place where people eavesdrop freely and butt into conversations, preferring unsought advice on how to handle women, where to find defensive goods, or how to keep young in old age. I remember one white-haired gent telling me and a friend to take plenty of time with our baths. You young people are always rushing about, and it does no good, he admonished. He was 75, but he looked 10 years younger, and the secret, he asserted, came from a book written by a Bulgarian who told all about baths and explained a technique for massaging the face with a hot, wet towel daily. Do it like this, our acquaintance advised, demonstrating how to wipe the towel around the eyes and down the jawbone, and you'll never look old. Nearby, workmen with tattoos, eagles, women, or Rodina, motherland, and inky outlines, wandered around in their black underwear, while a couple of other men sat in the corner reading and another group watched a domino game in progress. Practically everyone sends the bunchik, the attendant, out to the hallway for mugs of watery Zigolovsky brand beer. Plenty of bathers playing hooky from work arrive with bread and salami or canned sardines to wash down with their beer, but the favorite delicacy, one for which I can vouch, is vobla, a dried, bony, salted fish that you chew and suck on, the Russian answer to pretzels, potato chips, and salted peanuts. Some contend that the best time to visit the banya is in the morning because the steam is drier. As one veteran explained, many more prefer the evening for socializing, but everyone counts on making it a real outing. No one goes for less than 2 or 3 hours, said one government official. An hour and a half is too little. Our office driver, Ivan Gusev, used to take his teenage son once a week and spend all evening enjoying the clubby camaraderie, the food, beer, and the sense of sensual contentment that Russians call lyuks, luxury. Russians seek that feeling most in feasting and drinking. They love a party and seize upon any holiday and even the unexpected arrival of a stranger as a pretext. We knew Russians who used the historic change of the calendar and both secular and religious holidays to get in 4 celebrations at the turn of the year, Old and New Year's and Old and New Christmas. Moderation and frugality do not come naturally to Russians, they live for the moment, so when an occasion for partying and especially drinking arises, they will throw an entire bonus or a huge chunk of pay, more than they can sensibly afford, into a single evening of mad jollity and emotional Slavic self-indulgence. They may go out on the town with friends to a restaurant with a loud dance band, and fling themselves into bouncy foxtrots, mazurkas, polkas, and authentic mutations of the twist, monkey, or some pseudo-rock numbers, returning to a table well fortified with vodka, cognac, or sweet Soviet champagne to keep the party mood afloat. Or, as most prefer, they may kick in 20 or 30 rubles a couple for a grand holiday feast at someone's apartment. On such occasions, Russians abandon themselves to the orgy of feasting and drinking with a gusto that echoes a memory of hungrier times. In advance, they will prowl the stores and use all their connections to wangle some black and red caviar or smoked bacon, the rare luxuries that give Russians the feeling of high life merely by their presence on the table. For days the women work preparing zakuski, the hors d'oeuvres that are justifiably the most celebrated part of a Russian meal. When the guests finally sit down, the table fairly groans with food. Zakuski are never consumed without a string of good-natured toast. each punctured by everyone's gulping down a shot glass of chilled vodka. Russians will consume marinated mushrooms and vodka, salted herring and vodka, smoked salmon and vodka, salami and vodka, caviar on brown bread and vodka, pickled cucumbers and vodka, cold tongue and vodka, red beet salad and vodka, scallions and vodka, anything and everything and vodka. You cannot imagine what a treat a holiday is, and how important that feasting is for us, a middle-aged journalist declared. You know that just before the main holidays, the state stores are supplied with good food that is generally not available. Normally, we eat terribly, but we get used to it. People don't care, but on a holiday, then, we must eat well. It makes up for all the rest of the time. Holidays, however, are more than a time of joyous release, for what begins in good fellowship around the table all too often ends up in gluttonous inebriation, self-indulgent alcoholic escapism from boredom, frustration, and the cold. Demon vodka, as the Russians have been calling it for centuries, is a national vice, a calamity of the destructive proportions of the drug problem in America, and harder to uproot. The West has nothing equivalent to vodka the way Russians drink it. Like corruption, vodka is one of the indispensable lubricants and escape mechanisms of Russian life. The mere mention of vodka starts Russians salivating and puts them in a mellow mood. It would take an encyclopedia to explain all the vodka lore, from the gentle tap under the throat, which signifies drinking, to the scores of ditties Russians have invented to convey the message, "Let's go drink." Vodka eases the tension of life. It helps people to get to know each other. For many a Russian will say that he cannot trust another man until they have drunk seriously together. Vodka drinking is invested with the symbolism of machismo. Roy Medvedev, the distant historian, told me that as a young teacher out in the Urals, going around a village to encourage parents to keep their children in school, he was told by 3 elders in one home that they would not even talk with him unless he downed a thumbful of vodka. When he performed that feat, they regarded him as a man they could trust. Among working men and peasants, vodka is so popular that the $4.80 half-liter bottle is better than cash as pay for odd jobs. Those who have not been exposed to Russian drinking do not appreciate how hard Russians drink, but travelers to Russia astonished by it have remarked about it for centuries. In 1639, Adam Orleans, who represented the Duke of Holstein's court in Moscow, observed that Russians are more addicted to drunkenness than any nation in the world. In 1839, the Marquis de Custine, a French nobleman, picked up the Russian aphorism that drinking is the joy of Russia. It still is, but this does not mean Russians are relaxed social imbibers. They know no moderation. Once the vodka bottle is uncorked, it must be finished. There is no such thing as putting it back on the shelf, a notion that amuses Russians whenever a Westerner mentions the idea. Russians drink essentially to obliterate themselves, to blot out the tedium of life, to warm themselves from the chilling winters, and they eagerly embrace the escapism it offers. In Tashkent one afternoon, I watched 2 well-dressed Russians in business suits sit down for a late lunch and order a half-liter of vodka with their meal. The plump one facing me was Pickwickian in his round-faced, round-stomached good humor, which blossomed when the vodka appeared. The vodka was quickly poured, glasses raised in a brief toast, and clinked. Down went the vodka with a quick jerk of the head, a paw on the exhale as his fork jabbed a bit of herring and stuffed it into his mouth, chased by bread. At quick intervals the process was repeated. Soon a soft, blushing pink flooded the cheeks of the Pickwinian Russian. It was amazing to see how rosy the vodka had made his life. He wore a blissful look. When I paid my check, the vodka was gone and a modest decanter of cognac had appeared. The rest of their day was clearly done for. I have witnessed the final scenes elsewhere. If a woman is involved and someone asks her to dance, it can end in an ugly mood. Or, as happened one night at the Berlin restaurant in Moscow, two men went so rapidly through the vodka that by the time dessert came, one glassy-eyed gent bent down to his ice cream dish, preparing to eat it with his mouth, and simply nosedived into the ice cream. His friend and the waiter had to prop him up and wipe him off, whereupon he proceeded to eat the ice cream with a knife. Periodically, the press and political leadership inveigh against the national disaster of alcoholism. High officials have disclosed that intoxication is the major factor in the majority of all crimes. 90% of murders, accounts for more than half of all traffic accidents, is a major cause in 40% of all divorce cases, figures in 63% of all accidental drownings, 1/3 of all ambulance calls in Moscow. It is the prime cause of the absenteeism that plays havoc with the Soviet economy. Still, I found it difficult not to be skeptical of the state campaigns supposedly intended to curb drinking when alcohol production by the state liquor monopoly rises annually, when the rate of consumption is 5 times what it was in 1940, and when the pathetic little country stores always seem to have vodka even when they are out of less volcanic wares. Drunks, stiff as boards or crumpled into heaps, litter the city sidewalks at holiday times, not just in Skid Row areas, but almost anywhere. Heavy Sunday daytime drinking is just as common as a Friday or Saturday night binge. Women drink less than men, but more heavily than in the West. I've seen 14-year-olds drink vodka neat. Nor can foreigners spend much time in Russia without having their livers threatened by vodka. For centuries, Russians have been flooding Westerners with vodka as a form of hospitality, which conveniently numbs the traveler's critical faculties. Baron Sigismund zu Herberstein, ambassador of the Habsburg Emperor to the court of Ivan the Great, observed in 1526 that the Russians make every effort to get their guest drunk, concocting toast and pretext for drinking when no good reason exists. The guest who hesitates or sips instead of joining in the Russian bottoms up is sternly told that he is insulting the host, for Russians take no little pride in drinking foreigners, especially Americans, under the table. In my 3 years in Russia, I am sure that I consumed more alcohol than in all the rest of my life. Only once did it get out of hand, but it taught me something essential about Soviet life. In Bukhara, Anne and I met 2 scholars, an Armenian and an Uzbek, when our taxi broke down, and they generously offered us a ride back into town. From that came an invitation to dinner to sample Uzbek rice pilaf. But when we arrived for dinner, it was clear that the purpose of the evening was to drink with an American. Half a dozen men had been assembled, all teachers at the local pedagogical institute. They had left their wives at home, so that Anne was the only female. When we sat down, there were 6 or 8 bottles of liquor on the table. One man bowed out of drinking as the driver of the car, as did Anne. 3 other men, the elder trio, preferred cognac. A quick calculation showed that there were 4 bottles of vodka, equal to 2 quarts of scotch, for just 3 of us. For me, the little Armenian, and a handsome, muscular young Uzbek, who had spent all day in the fields harvesting cotton. The institute where all these men taught was shut down for 6 weeks, so that students and faculty could help pick cotton. Food normally provides some protection and an excuse to slow the drinking, but this table was discouragingly barren. except for a few chocolates, some marinated tomatoes, and a plate of green onions. The Armenian was impatient and did not want to waste time waiting for the meal. I tried to stall by talking to another man about his children, but there was no denying the iron imperative of the occasion. We drank to our meeting, to Soviet-American friendship, to peace, to détente, to our women, to a record cotton harvest, at which point the muscular young Uzbek gave me blessed relief by rising to recite selections from Omar Khayyam from memory, while I prayed for food. I did not like the tomatoes, but nothing else appeared. The cognac drinkers were nipping lightly, but my two vodka partners insisted that our rounds be bottom up to prove our friendship. I still felt all right as we toasted to our children, to all children of the world, to the wish that our children would never make war against each other, to the cousins of the Armenian whom he thought were in San Francisco, to Armenia, to Nixon, to Brezhnev, to the host's homemade wine, a sickly sweet potion that mixed badly with vodka, to so many other things that I cannot recall them. By then the conversation had all the clarity of the mad, disjointed drinking bouts of Dostoevsky's novels, but like a true vodka drinker, I was insisting to my wife that everything was still under control. My two drinking companions were now talking with my heart-to-heart Dasha-dush. By the time our plump Uzbek hostess finally appeared with the celebrated pilaf about 3 hours later, all the vodka on the table was gone, and we were all so numb that no one but Anne could eat. Vodka, as any Russian will tell you, has a delayed punch that strikes at the base of the neck with a guillotine suddenness, severing brain from body. The blow hit me as we went out to try to find a cab home, for the non-drinking driver had disappeared with his car. In true Russian fashion, my two drinking partners, convinced they had found in me a soul brother, insisted on riding home with us. They waited outside the hotel for an hour or so, while I tried to sober up by walking around the town parks, until two police officers steered Anne and me back toward the hotel, which by then was shut for the night. With some difficulty we got someone to open up, whereupon both my drunken compatriots and the police all lurched behind us up to our hotel room, with a great commotion ensued. Ultimately the police led off our two unfortunate friends. What is indelibly etched in my mind is the next day. One blessing of vodka is that it does not leave the headache or nausea of other liquors, but it totally demobilizes its victims. When I arose and applied the standard wake-up treatment of dashing cold water on my face, I felt nothing. My face was numb. Somehow we managed that morning to fly to Samarkand, but I spent the day in bed, not sick but totally useless, unable to function. It was this crippling devastation of the vodka bout which so impressed me. I have never experienced that before or since. On that occasion I had wound up in that helpless state somewhat accidentally, but the little Armenian and the handsome young Uzbek, and the millions upon millions of Russians who drink that way, had set out deliberately to destroy me and themselves from the very beginning.